There's a jar of lard on a shelf in a West Virginia farmhouse that was rendered in 1978 and is still perfectly good to cook with today. It's snowy white. It smells clean. It fries an egg the way lard is supposed to. That's not an outlier. Properly rendered lard, stored properly, keeps for years without refrigeration and even longer with. Improperly rendered lard, or lard stored badly, goes rancid in weeks. The difference is entirely in the technique. Here's the mountain way to render lard that doesn't go rancid, and the mistakes that turn good pork fat into wasted work. Start with what lard actually is. Lard is rendered pork fat, fat that's been heated slowly to melt out the pure oil from the connective tissue and water. Done well, the result is a clean, snowy white cooking fat with a mild, faintly pork-scented flavor and a very long shelf life. There are two general kinds of lard from a single hog, and they're worth distinguishing. Leaf lard is the fat from around the kidneys and internal organs. It's the whitest, cleanest, most delicate lard, prized for pie crusts and pastry because of its neutral flavor. Back fat lard, sometimes called just fat back, comes from the layer under the skin along the back and sides. It's a slightly heavier, more porky lard, good for savory cooking and general kitchen use. The mountain families rendered both, sometimes separately for their different applications, sometimes together for a general-purpose lard. The rendering method the mountain families used had several specific features, each of which mattered for the quality of the finished product. The fat was cut into small pieces before rendering, chunks of an inch or so, sometimes smaller. Small pieces render faster and more completely, releasing more of the fat into the pot and leaving less behind in the cracklings. The rendering happened low and slow. The mountain families would put the cut fat in a heavy iron pot, sometimes with a splash of water to prevent scorching at the start, and set it on the back of a wood stove or over a small outdoor fire at low heat. The temperature had to stay low enough that the fat melted out without browning or burning. Anything much above 250 degrees Fahrenheit starts to darken the fat and give it an off flavor. The old-timers watched the pot closely and adjusted the heat by feeding or pulling back the fire. Stirring was constant. The rendering pot needed regular attention. A wooden paddle worked into the melting fat to keep the bottom from scorching, to break up the pieces of fat further as they softened, and to help the melted oil separate from the crisping bits of connective tissue. As the rendering progressed, the fat turned into a liquid oil at the bottom of the pot, with pieces of solid connective tissue floating in it. Those pieces would slowly crisp and turn golden brown. When they were golden and starting to sink, a sign that most of the fat had been released from them, the rendering was done. The pot came off the heat. If this is the kind of mountain knowledge you want more of, our free Appalachian Almanac goes out every Sunday. One real method, sourced and tested, in your inbox. Links in the description. Now, the finishing steps, which are where lard quality is made or lost. The hot liquid lard was strained through a piece of clean cloth, often a piece of muslin or an old flour sack, into a stoneware crock or glass jar. The straining removed the crackling bits and any solid particles that would otherwise settle in the finished lard and shorten its shelf life. Only the pure, clean oil went into the storage container. The straining had to be thorough. Any bits of protein or meat left in the lard would encourage rancidity, because it's the meat and protein particles, not the fat itself, that go bad first. Clean lard, with no solids in it, keeps far longer than lard with debris. The water had to be gone. If the family had added a splash of water at the start of rendering, that water needed to have boiled off entirely by the end. Any water left in the finished lard would encourage bacterial growth and spoilage. A well-rendered lard has zero moisture in it, pure fat, nothing else. The storage container was clean, dry, and sealed. Stoneware crocks with tight-fitting lids, or glass jars with proper lids, kept the lard from picking up other flavors from the cellar and, most importantly, kept oxygen exposure to a minimum. Oxygen is the enemy of lard. The chemistry of fat rancidity is oxidation. Oxygen molecules combining with the fat and creating the off flavors we recognize as rancid. Any way to reduce the fat's exposure to air lengthens its shelf life. That's why mountain families stored lard in narrow-mouth containers with tight lids, filled to the top so there was minimal air space, and kept in cool, dark cellars where oxidation happens more slowly. A properly rendered, Properly stored lard would keep for a year at cellar temperatures without refrigeration, and much longer if kept cold. Modern refrigeration is even more generous. Properly rendered lard in a refrigerator can be good for 2 years or more, and in a freezer, essentially indefinitely. Now the mistakes that ruin lard. Rendering too hot is the most common. If the fat browns significantly during rendering, the flavor is compromised and the shelf life is shortened. Watch the temperature. Low and slow, not straining thoroughly. Any bits of protein or meat left in the lard will accelerate spoilage. Strain through a cloth that catches everything, leaving water in the lard. This is subtle but real. If moisture remains in the finished lard, it grows bacteria. Rendering must continue until all water has evaporated. Storing in a container with too much air space. A half-full jar of lard has more oxygen contact than a full one, and it will go rancid faster. Store in appropriately sized containers, filled up. Storing in a warm place. Lard keeps far better cool than warm. A cellar, a refrigerator, or a freezer, in that order of increasing shelf life. Contaminating the lard with tools that have touched other foods. Every time you dip into a lard container, use a clean spoon. Bits of other food introduced into the lard become spoilage sources. The rendering process itself is straightforward once you've done it. The whole thing takes several hours of casual attention on a stove and produces a pantry staple cooking fat that's superior to most commercial cooking oils in flavor, cooking properties, and, arguably, nutritional profile. Lard has become fashionable again in recent years among cooks who value its high smoke point and rich flavor. The cracklings are the bonus product. Those crisp, golden bits of connective tissue left over after rendering are eaten straight as a snack, worked into cornbread batter for crackling cornbread, sprinkled on salads, or fed to grateful family members. They're one of the best rewards of a rendering day, and the Mountain families always save them. If you want to try this at home, the honest starting point. Buy pork fat from a butcher or a local farm. A few pounds is enough for a first project. Cut it small. Render in a heavy pot on low heat, stirring often. Strain through cloth into a clean glass jar. Cool and store in the refrigerator. Your first render will produce lard that's good enough to cook with for months, and that will teach you exactly how the process works. Once you've done it once, you'll never go back to grocery store shortening. The deeper lesson is one this series keeps returning to. The Mountain families had almost no waste in their kitchens because they understood every ingredient completely. Fat wasn't a nuisance to be trimmed and thrown out. It was the raw material for a year's cooking. Rendering it properly required attention and skill, and the payoff was a pantry staple that made every other cooking task better. We've forgotten most of that in the era of vegetable oil and grocery store shortening. Real lard, rendered well, is one of the small pleasures of an old-fashioned kitchen, the kind of thing that makes a pie crust worth eating and a fried egg taste like something. A pot of pork fat on a low fire. A wooden paddle stirring slowly. A cheesecloth over a clean stoneware crock. A pantry with a year of good lard on the shelf. The Appalachian way of turning fat into a working cook's most valuable tool, and the honest details that keep it good for the whole year. The food chemistry of fat rendering and oxidation, the historical references on Appalachian lard practices, and a beginner's rendering guide are all linked in the description. If you want all of these methods in one place, the Appalachian Way Field Guide has 47 of them with the original sources behind each one. Link below. Real methods, real sources, real history. That's the Appalachian Way. We'll see you Wednesday.